I'm here to de-influence you. Yes, there are items that people use for knitting that I absolutely never use. Some of them might be useful for you and that's fine, but I'm here to let you know which ones I don't use, so maybe it can help you choose whether you need it or not. Some of them are gadgets. I would call them gadgets, meaning that they are maybe newer and serve only kind of one purpose. And some of them are probably things that everybody has as a knitter. So let's start. Number one is a yarn bowl. I've never, in all my years of knitting, used a yarn bowl. And I've also never wanted to use a yarn bowl. Why? Because I'm always on the move. I'm always on the move with my knitting. So instead of having a yarn bowl, well, I have bags. And I have favorite bags. I have bags that I use more than others, but bags is basically a yarn bowl for me. I put my yarn and knitting inside it so I can be ready whenever I'm ready to knit. I pick up the bag and I go wherever I want to go. Whenever I'm done knitting, I stuff everything inside one thing, whereas with a yarn bowl, I feel like you have the yarn in the bowl, but then the knitting is outside of the bowl. And then it's kind of heavier because oftentimes it'll be ceramics or wood. And then you're not necessarily ready to pick up your knitting and go. Obviously, if you're knitting a blanket that stays on the couch at all times and you don't have kids or pets that might run away with your knitting, that's fine. But for me, that has both and that like to be not stationary when I knit, a yarn bowl is absolutely not for me. It is pretty for sure, but I'd rather buy a pretty mug, let's say, from someone that makes ceramics than a yarn bowl. Also, just so you know, if you ever buy some sort of yarn bowl or something to feed yarn through, always get something that has an open edge or something where you can take the yarn out without having to snip it, because the thing that I hate the most is when I see bags that are or items that are meant to feed the yarn through a hole and start knitting, because then if you want to take the knitting, the ball out of that thing and go somewhere else with it, you have to snip, which I don't mind snipping when I need to, but I won't make occasions to snip when I don't have to. Number two, and that one, you might be very surprised. I have this whole set of cable needles. And I never, ever, 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 ever use cable needles. And you'll say, okay, Chloe, you don't use cable needles because you don't make cables? No, I don't use cable needles because when I do cables, I use nothing. I cable without cable needles. I've been doing that almost since the beginning. There are very simple ways to cable without cable needles. And I've made small cables, big cables. It works really well for me. So these are there. And I've used them for other things, like when I have to maybe hold just a few stitches for a few rows, I'll take maybe one of those because it has these ones are plastic and they have little ridges. Cable needles are usually either curved in the center or have something to hold on to some stitches so they don't slip easily. So these are very sticky. And so I could use them for other things. So I haven't necessarily thrown them out because I like to, use the stuff I have. If I can't find a use for it at all, then I'll donate them. But cable needles are just not necessary in my world, in my opinion. Let me know if you've ever cabled without cable needles down in the comments. Number three is definitely a gadget. But it's a gadget that I got from a friend, and she makes it herself, and it's a beautiful thing, and I wish I liked it more. And it's not her fault. It's just, I'll tell you the reasons why I don't use it. It's this very cute little yarn holder that unrolls and you can wear on your wrist like this. So this is very cute, and I really wanted to love it. And then I started using it, and almost immediately I knew that it was not going to be for me. Because when I knit and I hold it like this. First of all, I'm holding it much lower, so when the yarn feeds through, first of all, it kind of gets tangled in the hook section, and right now it's not going to do it because I'm holding it very high. But if I keep doing, see how it, like right now it's pretty good. But when I knit, somehow standing up, it gets stuck in all of this. But that's not the main problem I have with this. The main problem I have with this is when I'm walking and knitting, I'm oftentimes doing other things. I'm not gone on a walk where I'm just gonna walk and knit the whole time. I'm walking my dog, which means that at some point I'm gonna have to, pick up some poop. I may be at the park with my kids, and one of my kids is like, Mom, I need you to push me, or I need something. And then thing with this is I'm stuck with my knitting in one hand and this here, and I have nowhere to put the knitting down. So again, a bag, any bag that can be held on my arm. So these are Jezabel B. You might know Jezabel B, you might not. If you don't, the link will be in the description. She makes amazing bag. This one is a medium size, but like for a sock, she has a small size, and I have one of those, use it all the time. But I have some other shapes from other makers. As long as it has a strap and I can keep an opening, I'll, plop my yarn in my knitting bag, I'll knit, blah, blah, blah. But then when someone calls me, or when I need to use my hands for something, I just shove my knitting in the bag. I can still have the bag on my arm, and then I can attend to whatever I need to attend to with my two hands. And when I'm done using my two hands, I pick this back up and I start knitting. So for me, a bag is much more convenient than this. So this really just has no place in my making, even though it is gorgeous. It is smart. I've seen some people use it to like put it on a hook. That could be doable if I was in the car or whatever and put it on the hook next to me and start knitting, and then I can put that down next to me. Sure. But at that point, also for me, I much prefer pulling from the inside of my yarn cake. So this makes me have to take the outside. But when I pull from the inside, I don't need my yarn ball to be contained somewhere because I can just rest on anything, and I pull from the center and everything is fine and dandy. Another item that I absolutely never use, never ever ever, is, this one is a very fancy one because it's a full gadget with a bunch of other things, but is a row counter. So this one has a row counter like this, and then it starts counting like this. This thing is actually called the Knit Kit, I think, and it has a bunch of other things inside, which is great. And that's the only row counter I own because I got it as a gift, and I very much appreciate it for all the other things that I've used inside of this. But the row counter itself, I've never, ever, ever used a row counter. What do I use instead? Nothing. I used my eyes to count my rows. Sometimes, I'm going to say it myself, sometimes I would say to people, do as I say and not as I do, meaning I should put markers like every 10 rows or every whatever rows on my knitting to not have to count all the rows all the time. But I never learn, and I don't, so I just knit like this, and I don't think about putting markers. And then when it's time to knit the second one, I go back and I go, oh, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and I count all my rows, and it takes forever. But when I show how to knit, let's say a sock, I show to put a marker every 10th row, so you can just count the markers. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 is 60 rows. Make sense? So I use my eyes to count my rows, and markers when I should use markers, which to me is much more practical than carrying, like some are very small, but carrying around a row counter where I have to click with every row, for me, that won't work. Also, I'm always confused as to, do people not have anything thing that could play around in their things. Because for me, if I left a row counter with my knitting somewhere, someone would find it and start clicking it, and I wouldn't know if it's actually reliable once I pick up my knitting again. I don't trust it. I trust my eyes a lot more than the row counter. Another one that I won't say that I never use it. That one I've used before in certain situation, but I do not believe that you absolutely need it, is a duo of things. It's blocking mats and blocking pins. I don't ever use them. Like, the last time I used the pins and the mat, I think I did it probably 4 years ago. I made a video on how to block, and I did have a shawl that I wanted to have a very specific shape, and I had to stretch it into shape because it had lace and it had pointy, nice little pointy points. And in that case, I did use foam mats and blocking pins. So I own blocking pins. But if you're not gonna make lace or very specific shapes that have to be pulled, like if you're making sweaters, hats, mittens, socks, even just a crescent shawl, you don't need blocking mats and pins. You don't. If you have foam mats at home, great. You can lay down on a foam mat. But if you have towels, you can lay down on towels. If you have a heated ceramic floor like my bathroom floor, that's the best place to lay down my knitting to have it dry quickly. You can lay it on towels on your bed. You can lay it on your hardwood floor. As long as it's clean, you can lay it on anything. And then the actual pinning down, I very rarely do. So you don't absolutely need it if you're a beginner or you don't plan on knitting those lacy pieces. Don't bother buying the pins right away. The last thing is also something that probably all of you have in your drawers somewhere hidden. If you've knit more than 3 things, you probably never seen them again, and they are straight knitting needles. I deem those the most known, well-known, perfect, like, isn't this knitting, right? That's what knitting is. But I've used them for one project, which was the first one, and then they were put away and never to be seen again. Yeah, I use circular needles for all my projects. Whether it's back and forth, whether it's in the round, I use circular needles. They are much more ergonomic. They hurt less in the joints because when you're knitting on those, there's all the weight of your fabric that's hanging in this big long thing, whereas on a circular needle the weight hangs down and you don't hold the weight on the needle, but it goes down onto this flexible cable, which helps. So yeah, those are, I'm probably gonna keep him because I like showing people how to knit, or they're good to donate to someone that might need straight needles. If you go to any kind of charity shop, you'll find some of these, and you don't have much money, good, buy them. They're very fine for straight knitting. It's just that I won't ever use them again. Speaking of needles, one last thing that I forgot that I never use, but if I did, I would be in trouble because I would probably want to collect them because they're so adorable, are these little things. The little needle stitch stoppers that you just put at the edge of your needle like this, so then your knitting won't pop off of your knitting needles. Instead of using that, generally what I do is this, right? I'll pull my needle away from the tips, and so when I put everything away like this, there's no chance anything's coming off. If my knitting is a little bit tight on my needles and there's like more stitches than there are, like right now, these are kind of hanging out on the edge here. I live on the edge. I don't mind if things fall from my needle. If this happens in my bag, Like, people might scream at me when I do this right now, but if this happens in my bag and I pull it and I'm like, oh no, stitches out of my needle, I'll just weave my, my thing back on. It rarely happens, to be honest. And if I were very stressed out about losing stitches, one thing I could do, because I use a lot of interchangeable needles, there's a little hole at the base here that's meant to tighten your needle onto the cable. I would run a little light bulb stitch marker in those two here, so it, prevents the stitches from coming out. Or what you could also do, which I don't have with me right now, is just use a rubber band and tie a rubber band around the two needles, and then your stitches will stay put. And then you don't have to spend money on something in order to keep your stitches on your needles. So that's it for today. I hope you like learning what I don't use. I know it's a little negative, but I do have a video with my top accessories that I absolutely love using if you want a little bit more positive. And I'll see you next time.